The wind is quiet tonight. Can you hear it? Somewhere between your breath and the hush of your thoughts, there is a boat. It drifts on still water. No name, no destination. No one steering. And yet, somehow, it carries everything you need. Welcome, dear soul, to the empty boat. A place where words are not for teaching, but for remembering. Where stories are not told to entertain, but to heal. You've arrived here not by chance. Perhaps something in you is tired of chasing, holding on, trying to become. Perhaps what you long for isn't more, but less. Less noise, less fear, less of the weight that keeps your heart from floating. Tonight, and in the nights to come, you will hear 25 Zen stories, told slowly, like tea cooling in your hands. Each story a mirror, each pause a doorway, each silence a song only your soul will understand. We will wander through old temples and bamboo forests, meet wandering monks, broken-hearted villagers, angry children, quiet rivers, and the sound of nothing at all. But what you will truly meet is yourself, in pieces, in peace. So take a breath, not the kind you take before doing, but the kind you take before being. Let us begin. The first story is called The Teacup That Never Empties. Story 1. The Teacup That Never Empties. It was an early evening at the edge of autumn. The sky wore a quiet orange robe, stitched with clouds the colour of ash. In the foothills of a quiet village, where moss clung to stone paths and the smell of pine lingered like memory, a young man arrived at the temple gates. His name was Ren. Ren had travelled far, not in distance, but in desperation. He had read countless books, filled entire notebooks with affirmations and theories. He had tried ice baths and incense, retreats and rituals, but no matter how much he learned, or how hard he tried, the ache remained, like a shadow beneath all his doing. So he came, breathless with effort, to the old Zen temple known only by its wooden sign, "Sit and see." He was greeted by an elder monk with a face carved by kindness, who simply nodded and invited him in. No lectures, no questions, just silence and tea. They sat across from one another in the dim glow of an oil lamp. The room smelled of cedar and old pages. The monk poured hot water into a small clay pot, then waited. He did not ask Ren why he came. He simply waited, as if the answer would arrive without words. Finally, when the tea was ready, the monk placed a small porcelain cup before Ren and began to pour. The steam curled upward. The amber liquid rose and kept rising, until it overflowed the brim and spilled onto the wooden table. Ren jerked back. "Stop!" he exclaimed. "It's full." The monk smiled gently, still holding the teapot, in the air. His eyes were serene, bottomless. "Yes," he said, "like your mind." That was all. The room fell silent again. Ren lowered his eyes. For the first time in years, he did not try to explain. Something loosened in his chest. The moment held him like a cradle. Later that night, as crickets sang in the blackness beyond the paper walls, Ren sat alone with an empty teacup. And for the first time, he truly listened, not to teachings, but to his own silence. In the Zen tradition, this is a well-known tale. A student, brimming with his own knowledge, arrives to learn from a master. But the master does not offer more teachings. He offers less, an overflowing teacup, a lesson without words. The teacup is you. The tea is all you've collected. Your opinions, your wounds, your ambitions, your need to understand, to control, to predict, and the overflowing. That's your suffering. There's a paradox in the human heart. We want peace, but fill ourselves with what prevents it. We seek stillness, yet chase more stimulation. We say we want to let go, but our grip tightens with each attempt to fix, define, or become. To let go is not a doing. It is an undoing, an unlearning, a returning. Ren believed he needed more insight to be free. But what he needed was space, the kind that can only exist when we stop pouring in more and begin pouring some things out. Psychologically, this moment reflects a core truth. Anxiety often stems not from what's missing, but from what's too full. Our minds are crowded with shoulds and musts, comparisons, imagined futures, replays of the past. We carry beliefs not even ours, expectations shaped by invisible scripts. The teacup is no longer a metaphor. It is your nervous system, and healing begins when you no longer try to solve everything in the mind's realm, but instead pause, sit, notice. When you feel overwhelmed, ask yourself, what have I been pouring in? What am I trying to control that doesn't need me to? The need to control is often the fear of emptiness, but emptiness is not absence. In Zen, emptiness is space, where presence, clarity, and truth arise. Imagine now you are holding a cup. It is warm in your hands. You do not rush to fill it. Instead, you wait. You listen to the silence around it. You feel your breath return to its natural rhythm. You realize the space inside the cup is what makes it useful. This is the same with you. In the words of the Buddha, as rain pours into a house with a broken roof, so passion invades an undeveloped mind. But as rain does not pour into a well-roofed house, so passion cannot invade a well-developed mind. A well-developed mind is not packed with answers. It is open, spacious. It knows when to stop pouring. Tonight, as you lie in your bed or sit beside a candle, let the image of the teacup return. Ask yourself, not with urgency, but with wonder, what am I full of, and what might I feel if I let some of it spill? Let your breath become slower. Let your shoulders soften. You don't need to know what comes next. You don't need to solve this moment. You only need to stop pouring. You only need to empty just a little. That is the way of the empty boat. And so our journey begins. Let us meet again in the next story, under moonlight, where the mango trees grow wild and anger knocks gently on the door of awareness. Good night, gentle traveller, welcome home. Story 2. Beneath the Mango Tree. There is a tree that leans gently toward the river in a forgotten village, where the air tastes of clay and sweet fruit. It stands tall in the center of a quiet courtyard, just behind an old temple, its branches curving like the arms of an elder. The villagers say the tree is over 100 years old, and that it remembers every word ever whispered beneath it. It was under this tree that a boy named Kaito once sat, fists clenched, cheeks hot with rage. He was only 11, but in his eyes was the fury of someone who had waited too long to be heard. That morning, his older brother had humiliated him in front of the other boys, yanked away his drawing, tore it in half, and laughed while doing it. Kaito said nothing at the time, but now, hours later, the anger simmered in him like coals, beneath ash. His breathing was fast, his jaw tight. He picked up a stone and threw it hard at the river, then another, then another. He didn't want to cry. He didn't want to be seen. He wanted the mango tree to burn. That's when the old monk arrived. He walked slowly, as monks often do, as if each step were a choice. He did not ask what was wrong. He didn't even look at Kaito. Instead, he knelt beside the tree, touched its bark gently with his hand, and whispered, "This tree is very patient with fire." Kaito stared at him, confused and irritated. "What?" The monk looked up, smiled softly, and replied, "I once saw a man come here in anger. He lit a fire at the base of this tree. It didn't catch. The tree didn't protest. It simply waited." The boy crossed his arms, still breathing hard. The monk continued, "Anger is a fire, you see. It wants to burn, but not everything wants to burn with it." He stood, brushing dust from his robes. "And sometimes," he said as he turned to go, "the fire dies when no one feeds it." Kaito remained beneath the tree. The wind had changed. The mango leaves shimmered in the sun, and though his brother's laughter still echoed in his ears, something inside him began to loosen. He dropped the last stone he held. It hit the earth without a sound. In Zen teachings, anger is often likened to a flame, quick to rise, eager to consume, but ultimately dependent. It cannot burn alone. It needs fuel. Thoughts, memories, imagined insults, and replayed stories are its kindling. But unlike fire in the forest, anger of the heart disguises itself. It says, "I am justice." It says, "I am truth." And sometimes it even says, "I am love." We often misunderstand our anger. We treat it either as an enemy to be crushed or a weapon to be unleashed. Rarely do we sit beside it as the monk did, neither feeding it nor fearing it. Psychologically, anger is a secondary emotion. Beneath it often lies sadness, fear, shame, or helplessness. But anger is louder. It makes us feel powerful when we feel small. It masks our wounds with heat. To befriend anger is not to indulge it, nor to suppress it. It is to listen without obeying. To ask, what hurt is hiding behind this fire? Kaito did not have the words for this, but in the silence beneath the tree, he began to feel the truth in his body. His fists softened, his breath slowed. The world became less red. He did not forgive his brother that day, but he did not throw more stones either. And sometimes that is the first liberation, not loving what hurts us, but choosing not to pass the pain onward. There's a teaching in the Dhammapada. Holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. What if, next time you are angry, you do not ask, "What can I do about this?" but instead ask, "What is this fire made of?" What if you sit beneath it? What if you do not feed it? Imagine now you are sitting under a tree. Its shade is cool. Its roots are deep. Around you, the world is not perfect. People have disappointed you. Life has been unfair. But in this moment, you are simply sitting. The breath moves through you like wind through leaves, and the fire begins to flicker. You do not run from it. You do not fan it. You let it die, naturally, without judgment, not because you are weak, but because the tree inside you remembers. It is stronger than the flame. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, let your anger rest beside you without having to explain itself. You are not here to fix everything. You are here to soften, to see, and in time you may find that forgiveness is not a decision, but a quiet place that arises when the fire has gone out. Good night, friend under the mango tree. We will meet again in the next story, where walls vanish and the whole world becomes a temple. Let your breath be your teacher. Let your silence be your prayer. and let your heart remain open. Story 3. The Monastery Without Walls. Somewhere in the highlands of the eastern valleys, there was once a monastery that had no walls, no gates, no pillars, no stone carvings of lions or dragons. The villagers whispered about it, not because it was grand, but because it was invisible. They called it the Monastery Without Walls, a place said to exist wherever its master walked. One day, he would be seen teaching by a riverbank. The next, sitting beneath a fig tree in the middle of the market. He carried no robes, no beads, no sacred texts, just a bamboo flute and a silence that made people listen. His name was Master Tao. Some said he had once been the abbot of a great Zen temple, but had given it all away, land, titles, disciples, after waking from a dream in which he was drowning in bricks. From then on, he taught that the true monastery is the moment between breaths, the still space between what was and what comes next. It was during the season of moving winds that a woman named Lian found him. She had lost everything in a fire, her home, her job, her plans. Even the letters from her mother had turned to ash. The world felt unmoored. Time no longer moved in straight lines. She wandered for weeks with blistered feet and questions that scalded her tongue. What now? What am I without the things I built? When she finally reached the village where Master Tao was last seen, she found him not in a temple, but in a field, scattering seeds into dry earth with the care of someone planting stars. She watched for a while, then asked, almost without meaning to, "How do I build a life again when everything is gone?" He paused, straightened slowly, and turned to her. "Tell me," he said, "do you know where the sky ends?" Lian blinked. "No." "Then why do you think you must know where your life begins again?" He bent down and cupped a small clump of soil in his hand. "The ground doesn't know what will grow. It just opens." She stood in silence, tears slipping from somewhere deeper than she expected. They sat together until dusk, saying nothing more. Just two people in a field, watched over by the birds and the wind. In Zen, we often speak of non-attachment, of impermanence, but it is in moments like these, when everything has burned, that such teachings shift from concept to breath. The walls of our lives, the roles, routines, belongings, give us a sense of self, but they are not the self. When those walls collapse, it is not the end of us. It is the beginning of a deeper seeing. The monastery without walls is not just a parable. It is a call to root in what cannot be burned: awareness, presence, the ability to meet the now with nothing in your hands but openness. Psychologically, loss triggers the fear of non-being. We define ourselves by what we do, who we're with, what we own, what we plan. When these vanish, identity feels suspended. Uncertainty, grief, and anxiety fill the void. But what if the void is not empty? What if it's the most sacred space of all? Modern psychology speaks of the liminal space, the threshold between what was and what will be. It is uncomfortable, undefined, raw, but it is also the birthplace of transformation. Just as a seed breaks before it blooms, we too must be undone at times, not as punishment, but as purification. The monastery without walls is already within you. Every time you breathe through a moment of not knowing without grasping, you are practicing its way. Every time you sit in silence, not to escape, but to witness, you are walking its path. Every time you offer yourself compassion amid confusion, you are building it, not with bricks, but with presence. Lian did not return to her old life. Instead, she began to walk, not to escape, but to arrive, again and again. In each village, she would pause, sit, share silence, sometimes tea, sometimes stories. People began to wait for her. Some called her a healer, others a wandering nun, but she never claimed a title. She only said, "I am a guest of the moment," and in time she became like Master Tao, part of the wind, the field, the quiet doorway that never closes. There is a verse in the Prajnaparamita Sutra: form is emptiness, emptiness is form. What you think you've lost may only be the form. What remains is the formless, eternal presence that sees through all forms. Tonight, if you feel lost, if the path beneath your feet is crumbling, know this: you are not off track. You are in the monastery without walls. Let your uncertainty be your temple. Let your breath be your bell. Let this moment, just as it is, be enough. Nothing more is needed. Nothing more was ever missing. Sleep now, dear traveller of broken maps. The next story awaits, among the whispering rice fields, where the smallest step becomes the whole journey. We will meet there, in silence, as always. Story 4. Whispers on the Rice Field. The morning mist moved like silk across the valley, wrapping the rice fields in a hush too sacred for language. At that hour, even the birds spoke in whispers, and the breeze that rustled the golden stalks felt more like breath than wind. A young woman named Emmy walked barefoot through the rows, a woven basket on her back, and her thoughts spinning ahead of her like leaves in a storm. Her grandmother, who had raised her, had passed 3 weeks earlier. The funeral was quiet, the prayers short, but the ache lingered like a question that refused to be answered. Emmy had returned to the village from the city, where the lights were loud and the clocks ran too fast, to tend to the fields. It was her grandmother's wish. But in truth, she didn't know why she stayed. She felt out of place here. And yet, the quiet of the valley was beginning to undo something in her, like a knot gently loosening in the dark. That morning, as she moved, between rows of rice, she began to hear whispers. Not voices, not thoughts. Something softer, a rhythm, a sound older than memory. She stopped. The wind brushed past her right shoulder. The grain swayed. A dragonfly hovered near her knee. She suddenly noticed her breath, how it matched the wind, how her heart slowed when she stopped trying to hurry through the task. It was then she remembered her grandmother's voice, clear as sunlight breaking fog. When you walk the field, listen. The rice will teach you how to live. She knelt, her hands moving gently over the stalks, not harvesting, just feeling. She stayed there for what felt like hours, and when she finally stood, something had changed, not outside her, within. In Zen, we speak often of satori, moments of sudden insight, but not all awakenings come with thunder. Some arrive with the sound of rice swaying in the morning breeze, the whisper of now. The great Zen master Dogen once said, "If you are unable to find the truth right where you are, where else do you expect to find it?" Presence is not a place. It is a way of being, and the ordinary is not the absence of beauty, but the canvas of the sacred. The rice field is not just a field. It is the very texture of life, unnoticed unless we return to it with the eyes of one who has been lost and longs to see again. In modern life, We chase stimulation. We scroll. We skip. We seek fireworks to wake us from numbness. But often, it is the subtle that saves us. The return to what is here, what is enough. Psychologically, presence heals by pulling us out of rumination and projection. Anxiety lives in the future, regret in the past. But peace waits patiently in the now, so often ignored. Mindfulness is not exotic. It is this: noticing the sound of your footfall on soil, the coolness of morning air against your skin, the way your tea smells before you sip, the way a tear falls and dries without judgment. Emmy didn't realize it then, but her grief had opened a doorway, not to escape, but to come home. By touching the rice, she touched her own life again. Not the life she planned, but the life still unfolding beneath her. She began rising with the sun, not out of duty, but reverence. She walked slower. She spoke less. She laughed more easily. When neighbors visited, she offered tea and listened, really listened. Her hands were often dirty, but her mind grew cleaner with each day. There is a phrase from the Zen Rinkushu: the blue mountain is the father of the white cloud. The white cloud is the son of the blue mountain. All day long they depend on each other, without being dependent on each other. The white cloud is always the white cloud. The blue mountain is always the blue mountain. This is presence, to be where you are, to be who you are, without comparison, without force. Emmy stayed in the village. She never returned to the city, not because she had escaped grief, but because she had learned to sit beside it without running, because she had listened to the rice, and it had whispered a truth she had forgotten. You are alive, and that is enough. Tonight, let yourself listen, not to the thoughts that clamour for attention, but to what lies beneath them. The hum of your own being, the breath that has never abandoned you. Perhaps you will hear your own version of the rice field, the whisper in your life that says, slow down, I am still here. Let it be your lullaby. Let it be your monastery. You do not need to be anywhere else. You do not need to become someone else. Just walk the field. Just breathe. Just be. The next story will rise with the morning. A tale of broken things and hidden light. Rest well, dear traveller of the whispering path. We will meet again, where the bowl is cracked and still holds the sky. Story 5. The Bowl with a Crack. There was once a potter who lived in a village where winters were sharp and unkind, and silence filled the narrow alleys long before nightfall. He was known by no name, only by the things he shaped, bowls that fit the curve of one's hands like they had always belonged there. Each morning, he sat on his low stool in the open air, wrapped in a wool robe the colour of ash, spinning clay between his palms. His fingers moved like wind through tall grass. Quiet, graceful, certain, people came from far to buy his bowls, not because they were perfect, but because they weren't. Each one carried a blemish, a ripple in the rim, a dent in the side, a crack no wider than a hairline, sealed in gold. The villagers began to whisper, "He damages them on purpose," but they still bought them, and they still cupped their hands around them with care. There was something about the warmth of those lines, the way the light caught in the scars. One day, a traveller named Hero arrived, weary from months of wandering after a painful divorce. His wife had left without warning. His home was sold. The laughter in him had grown quiet. He had lost not only someone he loved, but the version of himself who believed love could last forever. He sat before the potter's stall in silence, watching. the man work. After a while, the potter looked up, meeting his eyes. No words, just a nod. Then he handed Hero a bowl, round, simple, glazed in earth tones. There was a thin golden line that ran along one side, like a scar that had learned. How to shine? What happened to this? Hero asked softly. The potter replied, It was broken. I repaired it. Why not make a new one? The potter smiled, dipping his fingers into the clay again. Because this one has history. It remembers. Hero stared at the bowl. It seemed to hum in his hands, like it had something to say, not in language, but in feeling. He bought it without haggling and carried it like a relic. That night, as he sat in the small inn with a cup of hot tea, Hero wept. For the first time since the day she left, he let the tears fall, not to change anything, not to get her back, but to feel the crack within him, and to begin, quietly, the mending. In the Zen tradition, there is a Japanese art known as kintsugi, the repairing of broken pottery with lacquer mixed with powdered gold. The idea is not to hide the damage, but to celebrate it, to highlight the fracture as part of the object's story, to say, this too is beautiful. In the West, we often hide our wounds. We speak of healing as a return to what was, as if pain can be erased, as if only the untouched are worthy. But Zen does not ask you to forget. Zen asks you to bow to the broken, to the cracked, to the gold in the place of the wound. Psychologically, healing from grief, loss, betrayal, it does not mean we become who we once were. It means we allow the pain to become part of who we are, without letting it define us entirely. A broken bowl is still a bowl. A broken heart is still a heart. Hero stayed in the village for several days. Each morning, he returned to the potter's stall, not to buy, just to sit. The silence between them became a kind of prayer. He watched the clay spin, the fingers press, the fire rise, and he noticed something. Every bowl broke differently, and every repair was unique, like fingerprints of pain, made beautiful by patience. When Hero left, he carried the bowl wrapped in cloth, held close to his chest. But something else had changed. He no longer walked like a man carrying fragments. He walked like someone holding a quiet truth. There's a verse from the Lotus Sutra that says, "Just as a lotus grows in muddy water, so too does wisdom arise from suffering. Your cracks do not disqualify you from beauty. They reveal your depth. They mark the places where light entered, where life refused to end. Tonight, if you are feeling broken, incomplete, betrayed, shattered by a grief too large for words, know this: you are not alone. You are not ruined. You are being remade, not back to what you were, but forward into something golden. Imagine now you are holding a bowl. It is cracked, gently, along the side, and someone, maybe life itself, has filled the break with gold. You do not hide it. You admire it. You honor it. Because in that scar, you see yourself, and every other soul who has dared to live and lose and love again. Let your breath move through the crack. Let the warmth of this moment seal it, not in denial, but in reverence. And when you wake, you may still feel the ache, but you will also feel something new. The quiet strength of one who has been mended. The quiet beauty of a bowl that still holds the sky. Sleep now, gentle soul. The next story awaits. By a riverbank where no wind comes, and patience must learn to wait without promise. We will meet there, still breathing, still becoming. Story 6. When the wind refuses to come. The river was wide and still, like a breath held too long. By its edge sat a boy with a handmade kite, red, thin, trembling in his hands. His name was Jun, and he had waited there for hours, his eyes fixed. On the open sky, his hope tethered to a string. His grandfather had helped him build it. Bamboo frame, rice paper wings, hand-painted swirls of gold. It flies best when you don't fight the wind, the old man had said. But the wind did not come. The morning passed. Afternoon stretched its limbs across the field. The shadows grew long, and Jun remained seated. Fingers curled around the string like it was a prayer. Children had come and gone. A few had laughed, tossed stones, pointed at the limp kite. He said nothing. He just waited. And with each passing hour, the waiting turned heavier, thicker, until it sat in his chest like wet cloth. It wasn't just about the kite. It was about everything he had ever longed for and couldn't reach. The father who left, the friend who changed schools and never wrote back. The feeling that maybe, no matter how ready he was, the wind would never come. He clenched the spool tighter. That's when she arrived. A woman with silver hair, robes the color of mist, walking with no sound. She knelt beside him slowly, like the earth had invited her. Long day, she said softly, watching the sky. Jun nodded, but didn't speak. Still waiting? Yes, he whispered. She looked at the kite, then at the sky, then at him. It's a fine kite, she said. Jun swallowed. But it won't fly, she nodded. And yet you stay. He didn't know what to say. She turned her gaze to the river, eyes far and deep. When I was your age, I had a bird. I trained it for months, fed it, taught it to return. Then one day, I opened the cage. It flew away, never came back. She paused. I waited by the tree for weeks, thought maybe love meant things had to return. And did it? Jun asked. She smiled, almost sadly. No, but I learned to love the waiting. Jun frowned. How can you love something that never comes? She reached out and touched the spool gently. Because not everything you wait for is meant to arrive. Some things are meant to teach you how to wait. Then she stood and walked away, her steps merging with the silence. Jun sat alone again, but the silence felt different now. Not empty, not cruel, just honest. He loosened his grip on the string, let the kite rest beside him, closed his eyes, and for the first time that day he didn't wish for wind. He just listened to the river, to the breath in his chest, to the sound of a world that moved without his control. In Zen, we are taught that expectation is one of the great sources of suffering, not because it's wrong to hope, but because we tie our peace to an outcome. The wind becomes a condition, and we cannot breathe unless it arrives. But true peace is unconditional. It is not found in flight, but in the stillness beneath it. In modern psychology, this stillness is called radical acceptance. It does not mean giving up. It means letting go of resistance, of demanding that reality conform to our desire. It means saying, this is what is, and I can be with it. Waiting is hard. It stirs the parts of us that want to move, to change, to make something happen. It confronts our fear of being powerless, of being overlooked, of being unworthy of the arrival. But waiting is also sacred. It strips away illusion. It reveals our attachments. It asks, who are you when there is no answer? No solution, No applause. Are you still worthy? Are you still whole? Jun did not stop wanting the wind, but he no longer clung to it. He came to the river each day, not to force the sky, but to sit with it, to greet the day, whatever it brought. Sometimes clouds, sometimes sun, sometimes nothing at all. And on a day he least expected, when the trees no longer bent and the river seemed asleep, the wind arrived, soft, patient, ready. The kite lifted from the earth with ease, like it had always known how. Jun smiled, but it wasn't the flight that moved him. It was what had changed in him while he waited. There is a line in the Avatamsaka Sutra. Do not seek to find the wind, but become the sky that welcomes it. Tonight, if you are waiting for healing, for clarity, for love, for something unnamed, let yourself soften into the space where nothing comes. Do not rush to fill it. Do not shame the silence. Just sit. Just breathe. Let the waiting be your teacher. Let the stillness be your strength. And when the wind finally arrives, or doesn't, you will know that you are already whole, already home. Sleep now, patient soul. The next story drifts toward us, with the hush of twilight, where an old bell waits to be heard again after years of silence. We'll meet there, between echoes and endings. Story 7. A Bell at Dusk. There was once a bell that had not been rung in many years. It hung from the wooden frame of an abandoned temple in the northern hills, swaying silently in the wind. The villagers no longer came. The monks had long since vanished. Only birds nested in the rafters now, and moss curled along the old stone steps. But still, the bell remained, large, bronze, and weathered by time, with a single line of scripture etched at its base. To hear the bell, listen not, with ears, but with emptiness. People forgot the bell, the path grew wild, the name of the temple faded from memory. Until one day, a woman named Aya arrived. She was not searching for enlightenment. She wasn't even sure why she came. Her husband had died a year ago, and since then, she had drifted through her days, like a shadow, eating, working, sleeping, smiling when she had to, but never feeling quite awake. Her grief was not loud. It had no tears. It was a silence she carried everywhere, like a bell that refused to ring. She had heard of the temple in an old journal her husband once kept, a place they had dreamed of visiting but never had. The entry was brief. There's a temple in the north. No monks, just a bell. They say it only rings when you stop trying to hear it. So she came, with nothing in her hands but memory and weariness. She climbed the hill as dusk descended, her breath soft, her heart quieter still. The temple was smaller than she imagined. The wood creaked underfoot. The air smelled of cedar and forgotten prayers. And there, just as he'd written, hung the bell, unmoved. Aya sat on the stone steps and looked at it. She waited. Nothing. She waited longer. Still nothing. She tried humming, then whispering to the air. She even closed her eyes and pleaded inwardly, like a child begging the wind to move. But the bell did not ring. Eventually, she gave up. She leaned back against the pillar, feeling the coolness of the wood, and let her gaze fall on the horizon, where the last light of day was dissolving into blue. Somewhere in the trees, an owl called. The world was softening, and for the first time in a long while, Aya stopped trying, stopped thinking, stopped seeking. She just sat. And it was then, in that exhale of surrender, that the bell rang. Just once. a low, deep note that echoed across the valley like the sound of the earth breathing. Aya's eyes filled, not because she understood, but because something ancient in her body remembered what it meant to be still enough to hear again. In Zen, the bell is not just a symbol of practice. It is a mirror. Its silence reflects our noise. Its sound reflects our openness. The bell rings not when we demand it, but when we become quiet enough to receive it. Loneliness, too, is a kind of bell. We often resist it, distract from it, fill it with noise, but underneath the ache of solitude lies a sacred space, an invitation to return to what has always been waiting. Psychologically, loneliness is not just the absence of others. It is the disconnection from self, from meaning, from presence. Yisaines had lived surrounded by people, but her silence had grown louder than any crowd. It wasn't until she allowed herself to truly sit with that silence, not fight it, not judge it, that something shifted. The bell rang, not to end her loneliness, but to show her that even in the hollow, something holy lives. She stayed at the temple that night, sleeping beneath the stars. In her dreams, she heard the bell again and again, not in sound, but in warmth, in breath, in the space where her grief no longer needed a reason. The next morning, she wrote a note and tucked it into a crack in the wooden beam. To whoever comes after me, it said, the bell is not broken. It's just waiting for you to stop searching. Then she descended the hill, lighter, not because her pain had vanished, but because she had stopped asking it to. There is a passage in the Majjhima Nikaya. When the mind is silent, the whole world surrenders its secrets. Silence is not the absence of meaning. It is its birthplace. Tonight, if you feel alone, if the bell of your heart has gone quiet, do not rush to ring it. Do not force yourself to feel better, or whole, or healed. Just sit, not to be fixed, but to be found. Let the dusk gather. Let the quiet arrive. And perhaps in that space, something will ring inside you. Not loudly, not for others to hear, but deeply enough to remind you. You are still here. You are still listening. And that is enough. Sleep. Now, quiet soul. The next story awaits. Beside a lake, where a fisherman stares into water and sees not fish, but the face he has long forgotten. We will meet there, where reflection becomes truth. Story 8. The Fisherman and the Mirror. At the edge of a quiet lake, where fog rises each morning like memory returning to form, there lived a fisherman named Koji. He was neither old nor young, neither poor nor rich. His hands were rough with calluses, his eyes dark with silence, and his boat, small, weathered, barely afloat, rocked each dawn in time with his breath. Every day for 30 years, he rose before the sun, tied his scarf beneath his chin, and pushed out onto the water. He never rushed, he never spoke, and he never changed. The villagers knew him only as the fisherman. They saw him row out and return, but rarely watched his eyes, for in them was a kind of stillness that made people uncomfortable, as if he had once been someone else and forgotten how to pretend. Koji didn't think much, at least not in words. His world was sensation, the weight of the oars, the smell of the lake, the cold mist on his knuckles. And yet, beneath the surface of his quiet routine, something had begun to shift. It started the morning he found the mirror. It was floating near the reeds, half submerged in mud and water lilies. At first, he thought it a broken plate, but when he lifted it, fingers wet, cautious, he saw it, a reflection, his face. Only, it didn't feel like his. He stared. The man in the mirror was him, yes, the scar above his eyebrow, the downward tilt of his lips. But something felt off, like seeing a house you once lived in, now abandoned, like finding a photograph in someone else's drawer. He carried the mirror back with him, washed it, set it on a wooden crate in his small hut. Each morning, after returning from the lake, he would sit before it, just for a moment, just to look. But day by day, the looking grew longer. Not out of vanity, he did not smile, or adjust his hair, or change his clothes. He simply stared, as if trying to remember the person behind the reflection. And then one evening, something cracked. He had caught nothing all day. The wind was high. His boat had nearly tipped. And when he returned, soaked and shivering, he looked in the mirror and asked aloud, "Who are you?" The question startled him. His voice sounded strange, not because it was loud, but because it was honest. He had not spoken from that place in years, and suddenly the silence he had lived in felt less like peace and more like forgetting. Into Zen, the mirror is a powerful image. It reflects all, clings to nothing. It is the essence of mind in its natural state, clear, unbiased, free from distortion. But most of us do not see with such a mirror. We see through filters, stories, labels, expectations. I am a fisherman. I am my past. I am what others believe me to be. We spend our lives polishing the image, protecting the persona, defending the shape of who we think we are, but the mirror does not lie. And when we look into it long enough, without distraction, without fear, it begins to show us not just the surface, but the space beneath. Koji began to ask more questions. What if he wasn't just the fisherman? What if the silence he lived in wasn't wisdom, but hiding? What if beneath the rhythms of his days was a deeper yearning, not to catch fish, but to be seen? Psychologists call this identity diffusion. When the roles we wear become so fused to our sense of self, we no longer know where the mask ends and the soul begins. But Zen offers a different path. The dissolution of identity not as loss, but as freedom. There is a line from the Diamond Sutra. The self is an illusion. When the self is seen as an illusion, the illusion is no longer binding. Koji didn't abandon fishing, but he began to live differently. He spoke to the boy who sold rice at the dock. He mended his neighbor's net without being asked. He listened to the sound of his own laughter, surprised it still existed. And each night before sleeping, he looked in the mirror and whispered, not, "Who are you?" but, "Thank you for waiting." One morning, he took the mirror and rowed to the center of the lake. The fog was thick, the water still. He placed the mirror gently on the surface, let it float, and pushed it away with a single finger. He watched as it drifted, no longer needing to keep the image, no longer afraid of losing what was never truly his. Then he closed his eyes, and for the first time in 30 years, he simply sat. No hook, no net, no name, just breath, just water, just being. Tonight, if you feel lost in your reflection, if the person you see feels distant, unfamiliar, fractured, know this: you are not your job, not your pain, not even your history. You are what remains when all stories fade. Sit quietly, look gently, and when the mirror begins to blur, smile. because that is where the truth begins. Sleep now, silent witness. The next story waits among the trees, where the leaves fall without protest, and the seasons teach us how to let go. We'll meet again under golden branches. Story 9. Leaves don't argue with autumn. The maple trees had begun their slow burning. It was the season of golden farewells, when the hills wore fire without flame, and the wind carried the sound of things preparing to let go. Each morning, the forest floor grew softer, blanketed with leaves, amber, crimson, ochre, a quiet celebration of something ending without resistance. An old man named Sora lived in a cabin at the forest's edge. He had been a teacher once, then a husband, then a caretaker for a wife who had forgotten his name long before she forgot her own. After she passed, he did not move, did not rebuild. He simply remained, like a tree that no longer flowers but still holds the sky. Every day, Sora walked the same path through the woods, not to reach anywhere, just to walk, just to listen. His cane clicked gently against the stone, his feet moving in rhythm with the rustle above him. He had learned, over the years, that the trees taught best in autumn. That's when he noticed her. A young woman, mid-30s perhaps, sitting alone on a fallen log, shoulders tight, hands wrapped around a scarf, as if holding herself together. She was new to the village. No, one knew her name. She never stayed long in one place. Sora passed her without speaking, then paused. Something in her posture reminded him of himself many years ago, after the war, after the news of his brother's death, when silence had become both refuge and prison. So he turned. "Beautiful season," he said gently. She nodded, or not looking up. He approached slowly, sat on the other end of the log. "I come here when I need to remember how to let go," he said. She looked at him then. Her eyes were rimmed red, but dry. "How?" she whispered. He reached down, picked up a red maple leaf, held it to the sky. The tree doesn't cling. When it's time, it lets go, not because it gives up, but because it trusts spring will return. She looked at the leaf. Her lips trembled. "But I'm not a tree," she said. "I don't know how to let go." He smiled softly. "None of us do. Until we do." They sat in silence as another gust came. Dozens of leaves spiraled around them, dancing without hesitation. In Zen, autumn is not simply a season. It is a teaching. Impermanence is not something to fear, but to understand. Everything changes, and in that change, everything belongs. The leaves fall, not because they have failed, but because they have fulfilled, and yet we struggle to release. We grip relationships long after they have hollowed. We carry identities that no longer fit. We cling to roles, expectations, memories, as if holding tighter will preserve what's already shifting. But nothing stays. And that truth, though painful, is not cruelty, it is clarity. In modern psychological terms, resistance to change often stems from our fear of the unknown. Letting go feels like stepping off a cliff, but what we rarely realize is we've already stepped off. The ground moved months ago. We're just pretending it's still there. True healing begins when we stop arguing with autumn, when we stop demanding that what has already left come back. The young woman returned to the forest every day that week. She didn't always speak, but she always sat. Sora would pass by, nod. Sometimes they'd share tea from his thermos. Sometimes they'd just listen to the trees. And then, one morning, she wasn't there, but in her place, on the log, lay a small folded note. It read, Thank you for showing me that grief is not the end, just another season." Sora smiled. Above him, a single yellow leaf twisted, paused mid-air, and let go. There is a passage from the Dhammapada. All conditioned things are impermanent. When one sees this with wisdom, one turns away from suffering. Letting go is not an act of force. It is the art of noticing that you're already holding smoke. Tonight, if something in your life is slipping, a person, a dream, a former version of yourself, do not tighten your grip. Instead, sit beneath the tree of your own heart. Watch the leaves fall, not as loss, but as rhythm, as grace. Let the breath come and go like wind through branches. Let yourself weep if you must. The forest is not afraid of your sorrow. Then sleep, not to forget, but to rest in the truth that nothing is ever truly lost, only transformed. The next story stirs just beyond the branches, where a lone monk reminds us that no one can sit for us, and the journey must be walked from within. We will meet again where silence becomes choice. Story 10. No one can sit for you. There was a path behind the monastery that few people noticed. It wasn't marked with signs or stones, and it didn't lead to any place impressive. No shrine, no waterfall, no panoramic view. Just a small clearing, shaded by tall pines and worn smooth by the feet of those who walked it before. The monks called it the place of sitting, but they never explained why. Visitors would often pass it by, drawn to more visible wonders. The bell tower, the koi, pond, the chanting hall. But every morning, just before dawn, a single monk would leave his sleeping mat and walk quietly to that unmarked trail, barefoot, bowl in hand, robe loose around his shoulders. His name was Rio. He was neither teacher nor student. He held no or rank. He never gave lectures. Yet every monk, novice or elder, knew of him, because he always sat. Rain or snow, wind or heat, joy or sorrow, he sat, back straight, eyes soft, hands resting like petals in his lap, not for answers, not for visions, just for the sitting itself. One winter morning, a young novice named Toma followed him. Toma had been struggling. His mind refused to quiet. His body ached. He missed home. Meditation felt like failure, a battleground of thoughts and fatigue. Every bell that summoned him to sit felt like a punishment. He watched Rio from a distance, watched the stillness, the breath, the space between thoughts. And when Rio stood to leave, Toma approached him. "Master," he said, bowing, "teach me how to sit like you." Rio looked at him with kind eyes and shook his head. "I cannot," Toma frowned. "But you sit every day." "Yes," Rio nodded. "But I do not sit for you," the novice blinked. "What do you mean?" Rio placed a hand on his own chest. "Only you can sit with your pain. Only you can meet your breath. I can show you the cushion, but I cannot carry you to yourself." And with that, he walked back down the path, leaving Toma alone in the snow-dusted clearing. For a long while, the boy stood still. Then slowly, awkwardly, he knelt, crossed his legs, closed his eyes, and for the first time, sat not to succeed, but to stay. In Zen, this is the truth we avoid the most. No one can do the work for us. We read, we listen, we seek teachers, teachings, miracles. But the breath must be ours. The cushion must be warmed by our body. The silence must be entered, alone. Because awakening, the real kind, cannot be outsourced. Psychologically, we crave rescue. In childhood, this is natural. We depend on others to co-regulate, to protect. But as we grow, we often carry the hope that someone else will save us. A partner, a guru, a book, a belief. And when they don't, we feel abandoned. But in truth, what we're being offered is power. The power to sit with ourselves, as we are, without flinching. Sitting is not about posture. It is about presence. It is not about erasing pain. It is about not abandoning yourself when it arises. That winter, Toma sat every morning. Not perfectly, not with joy, but with honesty. Some days, his legs went numb. Other days, his thoughts screamed. But he stayed, breath after breath, until the sitting was no longer a task, but a homecoming. Years later, he would become a teacher. But he never gave many lectures. Instead, when someone asked for wisdom, he would simply say, "There's a place behind the pines. Go there, sit. And when the earth no longer feels like punishment, you'll understand." There is a saying in the Zen tradition, "The path is not difficult for those who have no preferences. Just sit. Just be." Let the mind be like the clouds, the breath like the wind. Tonight, if you are tired of trying, of fixing, of being pulled in every direction, do not search for more answers. Just sit, not to escape, but to arrive. Place your hands gently in your lap. Feel the weight of your own presence. Listen, not for revelation, but for your own heartbeat. No one can sit for you, but you don't have to do it well. You just have to do it. Let that be your prayer. Let that be your revolution. Sleep now, quiet warrior. The next story rises with the moon, where jealousy meets the soft light of a sky that does not compete. We'll meet there under silver stillness. Story 11. The moon never competes. In the village of Hanagi, nestled between slow rivers and soft hills, there was a festival held each autumn night, the moon-watching gathering. Paper lanterns floated on the stream, soft drums echoed in the air, and the people sat along the banks with cups of warm sake and hearts turned upward. It was said that the moon always seemed closest on this night, so close in fact that if you were very still and very quiet, it would begin to speak to you. Children believed it told stories. Lovers believed it blessed their promises. Elders believed it reminded them of what truly mattered. But there was one man who never looked up. His name was Daiki. He was a craftsman, a skilled maker of wind chimes carved from bamboo and shell. His creations lined porches across the valley, each one carrying a sound like breath caught in a dream. People praised his hands, his patience, his gift. Yet, each time they did, he looked away. Because just beyond the bridge, in a home with red shutters and a rooftop garden, lived Satoshi, a painter whose work had been shown in cities Daiki had only heard of. His murals bloomed across stone, walls. His name appeared in newspapers, and during the festival, it was Satoshi's art that hung from lanterns and was praised in toasts. Each year, Daiki would come to the river, sit with his cup, and pretend not to mind. But his heart tightened when he heard Satoshi's name. His chest grew heavy when the villagers spoke of colours and vision and genius. And though he smiled, though he nodded, a small voice inside him whispered, "You are not enough." One year, as the moon rose higher than he had ever seen, Daiki wandered away from the laughter. He crossed the bridge, climbed the hill behind the temple, and sat alone beneath the swaying grass. The moon was so full, it seemed to breathe. He looked at it and, for the first time, allowed himself to speak what he had hidden. Why do I always feel behind? Why do I disappear next to his light? The wind moved, and then, soft, sudden, he heard a voice. Not from the sky, but from beside him. A woman sat there, older, barefoot, her eyes like dusk after rain. She pointed to the horizon. "See that star?" she asked. He followed her finger. A single pin of light shimmered beside the moon, faint, almost lost in the glow. "Yes," he said. "That is Venus," she whispered. "It shines in the morning, but not now." He frowned. "It's beautiful." She smiled. And the moon doesn't try to outshine it, nor does it try to shine brighter than the sun. It only glows as it is, full or not. And still, we look at it with wonder. She stood slowly. The moon never competes. Why should you? And she left. Daiki sat in stillness, watching the moon. For the first time he noticed its scars, the craters, the uneven shadows, and how they did not make it less radiant. They made it real. He thought of his chimes, how they never tried to be loud, how their music was small, soft, often missed, but always missed when absent, and he wept, not from shame, but from relief. The moon had spoken. In Zen, comparison is seen not as ambition, but as delusion. We are taught that everything has its own nature. And the path to suffering is to want the lotus to be a rose, the cloud to be thunder, the moon to be the sun. When we compare, we forget our place in the whole. We forget that the ocean needs both wave and shore. That music is not made of drums alone, but of silence and reed and whisper. Psychologically, comparison breeds shame and inadequacy. It narrows the mind, turning life into a race we never agreed to run. Social media, cultural pressure, even childhood wounds, all feed the belief that we are not enough, not yet, not unless. But self-acceptance is not stagnation. It is the ground from which all true growth begins. Daiki returned to the festival the next day. Not louder, not more confident, just clearer. He gave away chimes to children who smiled, hung them from trees for birds to nest beside, and when people asked his name, he said it gently, not for recognition, but for presence. And years later, when Satoshi moved away, Daiki still made chimes. The village still heard them at dusk, and no one forgot the man whose music reminded them that wind, like truth, does not shout. There is a line from the Lankavatara Sutra. Nothing whatsoever should be clung to as I or mine or me. The moon teaches this better than any verse. It glows, not for attention, not for approval, just because that is what it does. Tonight, if you feel less than, if someone else's light casts a shadow on your worth, look to the moon. Let it remind you that there is space in the sky for every kind of glow. You don't need to outshine, you only need to shine. Sleep now, luminous soul. The next story awaits across a bridge that leads to no shore, where grief and meaning meet beneath the fog. We'll meet there as always. Story 12. A bridge to no shore. The bridge had no end. It stretched across the mist like a thought half-formed, suspended over a river that never spoke. People in the nearby village said it had once led somewhere, to a monastery perhaps, or a town swallowed by flood. But now it led nowhere, and yet it remained. They called it the Morning Bridge, not morning like the light that follows night, but morning like the ache that follows love. Only one traveller crossed it regularly. Her name was Hana. Each evening, just before sunset, she walked its length. Never hurried, never turned back. She would walk to the farthest plank, where the fog thickened like breath on glass. And then she would sit. She never cried, never prayed. She just sat. Her neighbors whispered that she had lost someone, a son perhaps, or a lover who vanished without goodbye. Others said she had once been a teacher until her class was caught in a landslide. But no one knew for certain. Hana never spoke of the past. Her eyes held the kind of quiet that made people look away. And so, the bridge became hers. One autumn, a boy followed her. He had recently buried his father, a man he both loved and resented, whose absence now echoed, louder than his presence ever had. The boy's name was Renji. He could not cry, could not sleep, could not explain why the world felt blurred, like a painting left in the rain. He had heard of the woman who walked the bridge and thought, maybe she knows the way out of this fog. He waited until she reached the edge, then stepped onto the wood. The boards creaked beneath his weight. The air was thick. He sat beside her, not close, not far. They said nothing for a long while. Then Renji asked, "How long does it take for the pain to go away?" Hana did not answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her sleeve and pulled out a stone, smooth, pale, wrapped in a thin red thread. She placed it on the railing in front of them. "Do you see this?" she said. He nodded. "I've carried this for 5 years. I bring it here every night. It's not heavy anymore, not because it changed, but because I stopped trying to throw it away." He stared at the stone, then at the fog, then at his hands. "I just want to know why it hurts so much," he whispered. She closed her eyes. "Because you loved." In Zen, grief is not treated as an illness to be cured, but as a sacred guest, one that arrives uninvited, stays longer than welcome, and teaches us about the depth of our attachments. It strips away pretense. It humbles the heart. It reveals the parts of us that long to cling. But grief is not a problem. It is a path, a bridge, and sometimes it leads to no destination, no resolution, no final closure, just presence. Psychologically, meaninglessness is the quiet echo that follows loss. When something central disappears, a person, a role, a belief, the scaffolding of identity trembles. We question the point of our actions, the rhythm of our days. But in that questioning, something new can emerge. Not certainty, but sincerity, a simpler kind of meaning. The act of sitting on the bridge each day became Hana's ritual, not to move past pain, but to make space for it, to allow it to breathe without drowning her. Renji began coming more often. Sometimes they sat in silence. Sometimes he brought flowers or stones from the riverbed, and slowly his grief softened, not because it left, but because it was witnessed. There is a verse from the Zen master Ikkyu: "Break open a cherry tree, and there are no flowers. But the spring breeze brings forth blossoms." Healing is not linear. It is not logical. It arrives like mist, like dusk, like a bell heard in the distance when you've stopped searching for sound. One day, Renji crossed the bridge alone. Hana was not there, but he sat anyway, and as he held a stone of his own, wrapped in blue thread, he whispered, "I'll carry you, not as weight, but as part of the wind. Tonight, if your heart feels hollow, if you are searching for a shore that never appears, do not rush. Sit. Feel the wood beneath you, the breath in your chest, the presence of the one you've lost, not as absence, but as the space in which you now live more deeply. Grief is not your enemy. It is your proof that you loved, and that, even now, you are still loving. Let that be enough. Sleep now, brave mourner. The next story drifts on quiet wind to a fire once lit by anger, and how we feed it long after the flames have gone. We will meet again there, beside the ashes, where forgiveness begins. Story 13. Feeding the fire that burned us. The fire had long since gone out, yet the smoke still lingered in her lungs. Mai lived in a small house by the edge of the village, where the path turned to stone and the rice fields opened like pages in an old book. People spoke kindly to her, nodded as they passed, and called her Miss Mai, though no one really knew her anymore. Not since the fire, not since the betrayal. It had been 7 years. 7 years since her sister left in the middle of the night, taking the money their parents had saved, the family's deed to the land, and the man Mai once thought she would marry. No explanation, no apology, only silence. People tried to comfort her. They said it was fate, that such wounds are lessons. That time would heal, but none of them knew what it felt like to sit with a betrayal that still breathed inside you, like coal glowing beneath ash, not hot enough to rage, not cold enough to forget. So Mai fed it, quietly, daily. She replayed the last words, rehearsed the what-ifs, imagined the revenge, composed letters she never sent, avoided mirrors, avoided music, avoided forgiveness. She lit the fire every morning, not in her hearth, but in her heart, until the day she found the monk. He was sitting by the river, his robes soaked from the rain, watching leaves float by like old memories. He didn't look wise. He didn't chant or carry beads. He just looked still. Mai sat near him, not close, not far. After a long silence, she spoke. "I can't let it go," she said. The monk didn't look at her. "What is it you can't let go of?" he asked gently. She swallowed. "The pain, the betrayal." Still watching the river, he asked, "And how do you keep it alive?" The question startled her. She stared at him, but he didn't turn. "I don't understand." He lifted a twig and dropped it into the water. "Every fire needs fuel. You've kept yours alive a long time. What have you been feeding it?" She said nothing, because suddenly she knew. The story, the bitterness, the imagining of justice, the refusal to heal unless someone else apologized first. She had been feeding it with her attention, and it had become a kind of home. In Zen, anger is not denied, it is observed. It is seen not as an evil, but as an energy, and all energy must move. When we trap it, rehearse it, shape it into identity, we suffer, not because anger is wrong, but because we have mistaken it for truth. There is a saying, holding on to anger is like lighting yourself on fire and hoping the smoke will suffocate someone else. Mai began to notice her patterns, not all at once, but slowly. How she returned to the past when silence filled the room. How she avoided joy because she felt she didn't deserve it. How her hatred had become a tether, not to her sister, but to a version of herself that never grew. So she did. Something strange. She began to stop feeding it. When the thoughts came, she said hello, then let them pass. When the hurt arose, she placed a hand on her chest, not to fix it, but to witness it. And when she lit the fire each morning to boil her tea, she whispered, "Only water, no more rage." One day, years later, Her sister returned, not with apology, not with explanation, just with tears. And Mai did not forgive her with words. She forgave her with space, with the quiet that no longer needed to hold its breath. They sat together, two women, two flames extinguished, and the silence was holy. There is a passage in the Udana. Hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal law. But love does not always mean reconciliation. Sometimes love is stopping the story. Sometimes it's placing down the weight, even if no one else helps you. Tonight, if there is a fire inside you, slow burning, old, familiar, ask gently, what have I been feeding it, and am I ready to stop? Not because they deserve peace, but because you do. Let the anger rest. Let your breath be the wind that cools the coals. Let sleep find you before the story returns. You are more than what was done to you. You are what you choose to keep alive, and now you choose peace. The next story sways in the shadows of tall bamboo, where the secret to survival is not strength, but surrender. We will meet again there, where the wind bends us, but never breaks us. Story 14. The bamboo learns to bend. There is a bamboo grove on the southern side of Mount Asahi, where the wind has never been kind. It howls through the valley each spring, sweeping down from the cold peaks, tearing branches from older trees, toppling fence posts, flattening grasses. But the bamboo remains, year after year. Storm after storm, it does not resist. It bends. Once, during the worst storm the village had seen in decades, a boy named Kenji ran into the grove to escape the collapsing roof of his home. He had nowhere else to go. His parents were gone. His uncle, whom he lived with, had grown distant since the accident that claimed Kenji's brother. As if grief had turned him into a ghost, walking through daylight. Kenji sat beneath the swaying stalks, trembling from the cold and the roar in the sky. Rain fell sideways, lightning cracked the dark, and all around him the bamboo groaned, bent, danced. He waited for them to break, but they never did. The next morning, when the storm passed and the sky softened into apology, Kenji was still there, wrapped in his coat, surrounded by green, pillars that had bowed and returned upright, as if nothing had happened. An old monk from the nearby village came to check the grove. He found Kenji, soaked but unharmed. "You slept here?" the monk asked. The boy nodded. They didn't fall. The monk smiled and placed a hand on the nearest stalk. "Bamboo survives," he said, "because it knows how to yield." Kenji followed him back to the village. The house had been damaged, but he was safe. That night, as the wind returned in smaller whispers, he dreamed of the bamboo, not as plants, but as teachers. In Zen, bamboo is more than a symbol. It is a way. Tall but hollow, strong but soft, rooted but flexible. It teaches the middle path, neither collapsing under pressure nor resisting it blindly. When the wind comes, bamboo sways. When it leaves, bamboo returns. We are taught, especially in the modern world, to stand tall, to hold our ground, to be unshakable. But what if survival is not in standing firm, but in knowing when and how to bend? Psychologically, resilience is not the absence of pain. It is the capacity to move through it without becoming brittle. Rigid identities shatter under change. Rigid expectations break under disappointment. But those who learn to bow without breaking endure. Kenji grew up quiet, but strong, not in volume, but in depth. When conflict came, he listened. When sorrow returned, he made space for it. When joy visited, he let it pass without clinging. And when his uncle finally spoke, years after, to say, "I'm sorry I left you alone," Kenji did not recoil. He simply replied, "I bent, I didn't break." There is a verse in the Tao Te Ching: "The soft overcomes the hard, the gentle overcomes the rigid." This is the wisdom of the bamboo. And tonight, if life feels like too much, if the winds are loud and your heart aches to hold it all together, don't hold it all. Don't force yourself to be steel. Be bamboo. Allow your breath to sway in your chest. Let your thoughts pass like wind through reeds. Bow, if you must, not in defeat, but in devotion, to the part of you that knows how to endure, not by resisting life, but by flowing with it. Sleep now, gentle reed. The next story unfolds in a different kind of forest, the one inside your mind, where 1,000 thoughts rustle without rest. We will meet again there, where stillness begins not with silence, but with seeing. Story 15. In the forest of 1,000 thoughts. The forest grew inside his head. It had no trees, but it rustled, no wind, yet the leaves of his mind never stopped shaking. Its name was not written anywhere, but he walked it every day, barefoot, confused, trying to find a clearing that never came. His name was Akio. He was a scholar, a translator of ancient texts, and a quiet man by most accounts. But inside him was a noise that had never been translated, a voice that narrated everything. What could go wrong? What might be misunderstood? What should have been said? What must be done tomorrow? A voice that never slept. He tried everything to silence it. Tea, incense, walks by the river, long pages of copying sutras by hand, even fasting once, hoping hunger might strip the mind into stillness. But still, the thoughts came. Am I wasting my life? What if something happens to my sister? Have I already missed what mattered most? Even as he bowed before the Buddha each morning, the voice would whisper, "You're not doing it right." One night, exhausted from thinking, Akio wandered beyond the village, past the shrine, through the low hills, and into a place he had never seen before. It was a grove, wide and open under the stars. Bamboo surrounded it like a wall, but in the center was a single stone platform, round, smooth, empty. He sat, not to meditate, not to be still, just to collapse. He laid his hands on the cool stone, closed his eyes, let the voice keep talking. Let it swirl and swarm and circle. But something began to shift, not the thoughts, but his listening. He noticed the space between the words, the moment when a thought ended and before another began. It was brief, barely there, but it was real, and it was quiet. He leaned into it, not with effort, but with wonder, and suddenly the forest changed. The thoughts were still there, 1,000 of them, but now they were trees, just trees. He did not have to walk all of them. He could sit beside one, watch it move, watch it still. In Zen, the mind is often compared to a wild forest, or a drunken monkey leaping from branch to branch. Our practice is not to kill the monkey or burn the forest, but to become aware of it, to see that the mind is not the enemy. It is the landscape, and we are the one who observes. Modern psychology agrees. Mindfulness is not about eliminating thoughts. It is about decentering them, watching without attachment, letting them come and go like clouds, not believing everyone, not chasing each shadow. Akio began returning to the grove each night, sometimes with questions, sometimes with despair, but always with the willingness to watch. And the more he watched, the less urgent the thoughts became. He did not conquer them. He befriended them. "Ah," he would say as an old fear returned. "You again." Sometimes they stayed for hours. Sometimes they passed quickly. But always he remained seated, like a tree in the middle of the storm, no longer needing to fix the weather. One day a young monk joined him. The boy had trouble sleeping. His thoughts would race. He asked Akio, "How do you make them stop?" Akio smiled. "I don't. I just stop giving them my seat." There is a line in the Shurangama Sutra. The mind, deluded, moves. Enlightened, it is still. Yet, the stillness is not the absence of movement, but the seeing of its nature. Tonight, if your thoughts are loud, if your mind feels like a forest of worry, do not run, do not fight. Sit, let the trees rustle, let the wind howl, and listen for that small space between thoughts. It is there, and in that space lives the part of you that is not afraid, not rushing, not broken, the part that is watching, the part that has always been home. Sleep, now, watcher of the inner woods. The next story waits in the company of the tempter himself, where even Mara is invited for tea. We'll meet there, not to banish but to bow. Story 16. Tea with Mara. He came at dusk, no thunder, no fanfare, just a breeze at the door, a hollow knock, and the scent of dust and old fear. The monk had been expecting him. He placed his brush down gently, rolled the scroll closed, and walked to the threshold of his hut. There stood Mara, skin like storm clouds, eyes like mirrors, lips curled into something between a smile and a wound. "Still alone?" Mara asked, stepping inside without waiting. The monk said nothing. Mara looked around the tiny room, bare walls, a cushion, a kettle, a small altar with a candle nearly burned through. "No disciples?" Mara mocked. "No titles? No fame? What has all this stillness brought you?" The monk smiled softly. "Would you like some tea?" Mara blinked. He wasn't used to that. Usually, people argued, denied him, fought or fled. But not this one. "I suppose," Mara said, lowering himself to the floor. The monk poured 2 cups. The tea steamed quietly between them. They sat in silence. This was not their first meeting. They had sat like this many times over the years, when the monk was young and wanted to escape, when he was middle-aged and longed for recognition, when he grew old and feared being forgotten. Each time Mara came, with his whispers, his doubts, his illusions, and each time the monk offered him tea. Because in Zen we are taught, do not run from the demon, do not banish the darkness, invite it in, bow to it, see it clearly, and in doing so, remove its fangs. Mara sipped the tea. "You're not curious?" he asked. "Don't you wonder what life would be like if you had said yes to the things I offered?" The monk looked out the window where the sky was turning the colour of ash. "I did say yes," he said, "to the suffering that came from chasing them. That was enough." Mara chuckled, low and bitter. "You think yourself free of me. The monk turned back to him, his eyes warm and empty at once. No, only familiar. Psychologically, Mara is not a figure of fiction. He is every voice that says, "You are not enough." Every craving that distracts us from presence. Every self-doubt dressed as reason. Every echo of shame we mistake for truth. In Buddhist teaching, Mara appeared even to the Buddha, not just once, but many times. He offered power, pleasure, escape. And even after enlightenment, Mara returned. Because awakening does not make Mara vanish. It teaches us to see through him, to know his tricks, and still choose peace. The monk finished his tea. "I won't pretend you don't exist," he said, "but I won't worship you either." Mara tilted his head. "Then why give me tea?" "Because denying you makes you stronger. But sitting with you, that makes me whole." Mara stood. The shadows seemed to grow taller. "You've grown boring," he said, walking to the door. "Or maybe you've grown quiet," the monk replied. They both smiled. Then Mara left. Not defeated, but understood. In your own life, Mara will come. When you are tired, when you doubt, when your heart wants to run from itself. He will not wear horns. He will wear your face, your voice, your old fears. But you do not need to fight. You do not need to prove your worth. You only need to stay, breathe, and pour the tea, because what Mara cannot survive is your calm. There is a verse from the Theravāda. "With mindfulness as sword and wisdom as shield, I faced Mara not to kill him, but to know him. Tonight, if the tempter comes, the anxiety, the craving, the shame, do not slam the door, open it. Set 2 cups and say, 'You may visit, but I decide what we drink.' Sleep now, brave host." The next story rests beyond the gate, where an old monk's room is empty, yet more full than any palace. We'll meet there, where simplicity reveals the sacred. Story 17. The Old Monk's Empty Room. The room was bare, not austere, not neglected, just still. Its walls were made of old cedar, faded to a soft grey by sun and time. There was no bed, only a simple mat. No desk, only a low table. No window, glass, only rice paper that fluttered slightly when the wind came. This was the room of Master Renshin, a monk who had lived in the same temple for 60 years and who, by choice, had kept only what could be carried in one breath. When younger, monks visited. They often grew uneasy. "Where are your books?" one asked. "I gave them away." "Where is your shrine?" He smiled. "Outside." "Where are your treasures?" He looked around. "Here." They would nod politely, but leave quickly, whispering that perhaps age had made him eccentric or forgetful. But those who stayed, a little longer, began to hear something else. The quiet. It wasn't the kind of silence that pressed against the ears. It was the kind that entered through the skin, that filled the space between heartbeats. That made a cup of tea feel like a ceremony. One day, a young monk named Isamu was sent to clean Renshin's room. He expected to be finished in minutes, but as he swept, he felt strange, not hurried, not bored. Something about the room slowed him down. Every movement felt noticed, every breath mirrored. Renshin watched from the doorway, hands tucked into his sleeves. After a while, Isamu asked, "Why don't you keep more things? Doesn't it feel empty?" The old monk stepped inside. He touched the wall, sat on the mat. "Let me show you something." He reached beneath the table and pulled out a small, lacquered bowl. Its shape was simple, its colour unremarkable. "This," he said, "was given to me by my teacher. I've used it for 40 years. For rice, for tea, for flowers, for water. When someone cries, he held it out. What do you see? Isamu blinked. A bowl. Renshin nodded. And what makes it a bowl? The boy frowned. Its shape? The monk smiled. No, it's emptiness. He placed the bowl on the table. If it were full already, of jewels, of opinions, of noise, it couldn't receive anything new. He looked around the room. This is my mind, my heart, my offering. In Zen, emptiness is not void. It is potential. It is the open space in which form arises. Just as a bowl holds nourishment only because it is empty, the self holds wisdom only when it is not filled with self. Psychologically, we cling to identity, to possessions, to symbols of worth, because they feel solid. But the paradox is this: the more we hold, the less we can receive. We fill our homes with objects, our calendars with tasks, our minds with stories, and we wonder why we feel crowded. But when we begin to release, when we choose space over accumulation, we do not become poorer, we begin to breathe. Renshin once said, "The richest man I ever met had nothing to prove, nothing to store, and nothing to lose." After that day, Isamu returned often, not to clean, just to sit. Sometimes he brought questions, sometimes just his silence, but always he left lighter. Years later, when Renshin passed, the room was left untouched, not because there was much to protect, but because the stillness itself had become sacred. Visitors now come from far away. They step inside, sit for a moment, and feel it. The kind of fullness that can only arise from letting go. There is a line from the Heart Sutra: form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Tonight, if your world feels cluttered, if your thoughts feel heavy, your life too full of noise, ask not what you can gain. Ask what you can set down, what no longer serves, what space longs to return. You do not need more. You need room. Breathe into it. Make tea slowly. Fold the blanket with care. Let your life be a quiet bowl. Sleep now, gentle keeper of simplicity. The next story floats gently toward a bird in a temple, where stillness is broken not by chaos, but by song. We'll meet again there, where silence becomes a listener. Story 18, A Bird in a Silent Temple. The temple had not echoed in years, not with chant, not with bell, not with the footsteps of pilgrims. It sat high in the mountain mist, hidden by cedars and time, once a place of teaching, now a place of remembering. The stone path was broken in places, the lanterns long unlit, but the walls still breathed, and the air inside still held the shape of prayers. One morning, just after the rain had stopped, but before the dew had dried, a bird flew in. It was small, dark feathers, bright eyes, a single note in its throat. No one saw it arrive. No one was meant to, except the woman who sat alone in the meditation hall, her eyes closed, her hands resting lightly in her lap. Her name was Michiko. She had come to the temple weeks ago, asking only for silence. The head monk, a man who now spoke more with brooms than words, gave her a room and a nod. That was all. She did not speak for many days. Not out of vow, but because speech felt too sharp for the softness she was beginning to remember. Each day she sat, each night she wept, softly, without drama, as if the tears were just another form of breathing. She was not seeking enlightenment. She was trying to hear herself again, the voice beneath the voice, the song beneath the noise, and it was in that stillness that the bird arrived. It landed on the wooden beam just above her, then sang a single note, not loud, not long, but pure. Michiko opened her eyes. The sound rang inside her like a bell, and something released. She wept again, not from sadness this time, but from recognition. It had been years since something sang without asking her to respond, without expectation, without performance, just one being, making sound, because it was alive. In Zen, silence is not emptiness. It is invitation. It is the space where truth reveals itself, not through words, but through what lives beneath them. The greatest teachings are often not spoken. They are heard. Only when the mind stops preparing answers and the heart begins to open. Psychologically, we are trained to fill silence, to fix it, to interpret it, to escape it. But silence, when honored, becomes the deepest mirror. In the absence of noise, we meet our wounds. In the absence of reaction, we discover our resistance, and in the absence of trying, we begin to hear. Michiko stayed for 40 days. She did not chant. She did not seek guidance. She simply listened to the creak of the floor, the whisper of her breath, the memories rising like incense, the occasional cry of the bird, who seemed to come and go without pattern, always just as she needed to remember her aliveness. One day, a younger nun asked her, "Why do you listen so much?" Michiko smiled, "Because most things only speak when we stop speaking." There is a line from the Zen Rinkushu: "The bird sings, the mountain remains still. Do not seek to understand, just become the song." Eventually, Michiko left the temple. She did not say goodbye, only bowed to the walls, the bird, the silence. In the years that followed, she became a teacher, but she never called herself one. Instead, she offered spaces, not lectures, not methods, just rooms where people could sit and begin again to listen. Tonight, if the world feels too loud, if your thoughts echo without end, do not seek more to say. Seek less to say. Light a candle, close your eyes, and ask the silence, "What have I not been willing to hear?" Then, wait. The bird may sing or not, but your heart will begin to speak, and you at last will remember how to listen. Sleep now, tender listener. The next story is already breathing, in the breath of a teacher who gave away all answers and left only the mystery behind. We will meet again there, where knowledge fades and knowing begins. Story 19. He gave away the answer. They came to him with questions. Some traveled days through snow. Others crossed deserts with cracked sandals and hope burning in their throats. Some carried books. Others carried wounds. All carried the same desire to be told the answer. His name was Master Shunyo, but he rarely spoke it, and he rarely gave what they came for. They found him in a small hut near the sea, a weathered robe around his thin frame, a smile soft as rice steam. He spent most of his time in the garden, tending to radish and moss, humming melodies no one recognized. The seekers came, and they came full of urgency. "How do I find peace?" one asked. Master Shunyo offered him a cup of cold water and said, "Drink this slowly." But what about the path, the practice, the solution? The monk nodded at the garden. The soil doesn't ask how to be soil, it just yields to the seed. Another asked, "What is the meaning of enlightenment?" Shunyo handed him a broom. Sweep until there is nothing left but breath. A third, trembling with grief, asked, "Will I ever be whole again?" The old man gently placed his hand on the seeker's chest. "You already are, but you keep standing in your own way." Some left confused, some left angry, some stayed. And in the staying, they began to see. He was not refusing to answer. He was removing their need for one. He didn't explain. He embodied. He didn't argue. He revealed. He didn't teach by speaking. He taught by vanishing, from the center, from the pedestal, from the role they expected him to play. In Zen, there is a tradition of direct transmission, not through scripture, but through experience. The truth is not something you are told. It is something you see when the noise inside quiets. Master Shunyo once said, "An answer given is borrowed. An answer lived is yours." Psychologically, the mind seeks control through knowledge. It believes that if it can understand, it can be safe. But true safety, the kind that lasts, comes not from answers, but from presence, from sitting in the question without needing to fix it, from noticing that even without knowing, you are still breathing, still here, still whole. One evening, a young woman named Aiko arrived. She had studied every sutra, memorized every koan, passed every exam, but something still felt incomplete, hollow, as if she had mastered the language of truth but never tasted its silence. She sat before Shunyo and asked the oldest question. "Who am I?" He said nothing. She waited, then asked again. He smiled. "Do you really want the answer?" "Yes," she said. He reached behind him and handed her a mirror. She looked into it, then looked back at him, confused. "This is just me," he nodded. "Then what else are you looking for?" She wanted to argue, but something inside her stopped. She looked again, not at the features, not at the face, but at the space behind the eyes. And for the first time in her life, she didn't reach for understanding. She allowed the mystery to remain. And in that allowing, something opened. She wept. Not out of sorrow, but surrender. From that day on, she stayed, not to follow him, but to follow herself. And when visitors came, asking the same questions she once asked, she simply pointed to the mirror hanging near the garden gate. Sometimes, the answer you seek is not a sentence. It is the pause that lives before the question. It is the leaf falling with no reason. It is the breath you forget to notice. It is your own reflection, not explained, but seen. There is a passage from the Platform Sutra. The truth has no form. It is found not in seeking, but in ceasing to seek. Tonight, if you are searching for meaning, for resolution, for the key that will unlock the ache, set the search down, not forever, just for now. Sit, breathe, look gently into the mystery you are, and let the answer be this: you are already it. Sleep now, wandering question. The next story glows softly from within, where we discover that nothing is missing, and everything we chased was already ours. We'll meet again in that stillness, where arrival was waiting all along. Story 20. Nothing is missing. She had spent most of her life searching for meaning, for worth, for that one feeling, the quiet exhale of being complete. Hana was a midwife by trade, a listener by nature, and a seeker by secret. She helped bring dozens of children into the world, yet still felt herself waiting to be born. Her bookshelf overflowed with teachings, Zen, Vedanta, poetry, psychology. Her journals were thick with underlined truths. She had traveled to temples, retreated into silence, followed the breath, burned incense, practiced stillness. But something always felt just beyond reach, as if peace lived in another room, as if happiness was a door, slightly ajar, that she could never quite push open. She said it to herself often. There's still something missing. It whispered in quiet mornings, in the pause after joy, in the space between her breath and her body. She tried not to say it aloud. People called her lucky, wise, grounded, but the ache hummed just beneath the surface. One winter, on her 40th birthday, she decided to spend 3 days alone in the mountains. She packed lightly, tea, a small notebook, a single photograph of her younger self, and rented a cabin without electricity. She told herself it was for rest, but truthfully, she hoped this would be the place she'd finally feel enough. The first day was silence, the second was tears, the third, nothing, not enlightenment, not darkness, just a bowl of rice, a sparrow tapping on the window, the warmth of her own breath in the cold. It was enough. She didn't understand it at first. But as she washed the bowl slowly, as the water steamed against her skin, she heard it. Not in words, but in being. Nothing is missing. She stopped, set the bowl down, touched her heart with one hand. The ache was still there, but it no longer meant emptiness. It meant aliveness. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just stood, whole. In Zen, there is a deep paradox. The seeker must exhaust all seeking in order to discover that there is nothing to seek. We chase fulfillment through success, love, validation, insight. We treat peace as a product, something to earn, achieve, unlock. But the true path circles us back, gently, until we sit down in the same place we began and see it with new eyes. The practice is not in gaining. It is in remembering. Psychologically, this mirrors what some call the arrival fallacy, the illusion that once we reach a certain milestone, we will finally feel okay. But we carry our minds with us, and unless we shift inwardly, no outer change will feel like enough. Hannah returned to the city with nothing new, no revelation, no title, no story worth retelling, only a softened gaze, only a presence that no longer asked for more, and people noticed. They asked, "What happened?" She would smile, offer them tea, and say, "I finally stopped looking for what I never lost." There is a line from the Dhammapada. Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. Tonight, if you feel the tug, that ache that says, you are not there yet, do not rush to fix it. Just pause. Place a hand on your chest. Feel the breath that never needed permission. Feel the moment that holds you without condition. Nothing is missing. You are not a puzzle waiting to be solved. You are not a problem to correct. You are a bowl already full, but filled with sky. Sleep now, resting seeker. The next story waits behind a gate that opens inward, where we learn that safety is not found in the world, but in the quiet ground of the heart. We will meet there in stillness, as always. Story 21. The gate opens inward. There was once a temple known only by its gate, no signs, no path. Just an old wooden structure at the edge of a hill, standing alone beneath the sky. Travelers often passed by, curious but unsure. The gate led nowhere, it seemed. No walls, no buildings, no statue, not even a stone lantern. Just grass, just wind. And yet, They said that those who walked through it felt something change. One afternoon, a young man named Ray stood before it. He was tired, not from the journey, though his legs were sore, but from the quiet ache of never arriving. He had spent years drifting between jobs, cities, relationships, always looking for a place that felt like home, a place that would let him exhale without fear. He had almost given up when he heard of the gate. "It opens where you need to go," someone said, half smiling. "But only if you don't expect it to." So he came, and now he stood there, unsure. It looked ordinary. The wood was cracked in places. The beams slanted gently. Ivy curled around the joints, but the silence was different here, not empty, not lonely, just spacious. He took one breath, then stepped through. Nothing happened. No wind, no light, no whisper. Just the same hill, same air. He exhaled, and for reasons he couldn't explain, he sat down right there in the grass. Something in him had stopped, moving. In Zen, the true gate does not lead outward, it leads inward, and the way in is not paved with effort, but surrender. It opens not by force, but by stillness. Ray sat for a long time. No goal, no task. Only the sense that something had finally stopped running. He thought of his childhood home, of the long hallway where he used to hide, of the door that never closed, properly, of his mother's voice calling him in the dark. He had searched for that safety ever since, in cities, in lovers, in books, but none had lasted. And now, sitting in the grass with nothing to protect him, no roof, no plan, he felt safe. Not because the world had changed, but because he no longer needed it to. Psychologically, our search for external security often mirrors the wound of early disconnection, the longing for holding, for protection, for something or someone, to say, "You are allowed to be." But if that promise was never fully made, we search for it again and again, mistaking movement for healing. But Zen whispers otherwise. It says, "The gate is not there, it is here. The home is not behind a wall, it is behind your breath. The belonging is not offered by others, it blooms when you offer it to yourself." Ray returned to the gate many times after that. Sometimes he brought tea. Sometimes he brought others. He never explained it. He simply said, "Let's sit. The wind is different here." And for some reason, people stayed, not to learn, but to remember. There is a line from the Vimalakirti Sutra: "The true dwelling of the awakened one is nowhere abiding," meaning, the awakened do not belong to places. They belong to presence. Tonight, if you feel far from home, if the world feels unsafe, your thoughts scattered, your body unsettled, stop seeking the gate outside. Close your eyes. Place one. Palm on your chest, let your breath rise and fall without correction, and listen. Something inside you is already opening. You do not need a path. You are the path. You do not need a gate. You are the gate, and it opens inward. Sleep now, returning soul. The next story rises with the morning cloud, where forgiveness is not a lesson, but a movement, and the clouds carry no baggage as they pass. We'll meet again in that sky. Story 22. Clouds carry no baggage. It had rained that morning. The sky, now clearing, still held a few wisps of cloud, delicate, white, dissolving in sunlight. A woman sat beneath the eaves of her house, a worn straw mat beneath her knees, and, a cup of lukewarm tea between her palms. Her name was Saki. She was known in the village for her kindness, the sort that doesn't call attention to itself. She made soup for the sick, mended robes for the monks, bowed gently to passing dogs. But those who looked closely saw a tension in her eyes, like someone watching the door of a house that had once been broken into. She carried something. Old hurt, a wound dressed politely. It was from her sister. They hadn't spoken in years, not since the wedding that never happened, the letter that was never sent, the decision that Saki never forgave, not aloud, not in her chest, not in the silent place where grief becomes identity. And yet, life continued, until this morning. When the rain had just passed, and a small envelope was left outside her door. No name, no message, only a photograph of two young girls holding hands in a field of mustard flowers, laughing. Saki stared at it for a long time. She wanted to crumple it, to cry, to feel something. But instead, she did something unexpected. She walked to the hill outside the village, where the sky was wide and open, and lay down in the grass. The clouds were moving slowly above her, not in a hurry, not trying to explain, just passing. She watched them for a long time, and then she whispered, "Maybe I don't need to carry it anymore." She didn't mean the pain. She meant the story, the holding, the tightness in her ribs when she thought of what could have been, should have been, never was. In Zen, forgiveness is not an act of erasure, it is an act of release. We do not forget. We remember differently. We loosen the grip. We stop making the wound a museum. There is no need to condone, to reconcile, to explain, only to soften, only to let the sky be sky and the clouds pass through. Psychologically, we carry pain not only in memory, but in posture, in breath, in nervous system. Forgiveness, true forgiveness, is not a decision made in the mind, but a trembling that begins in the heart, when it no longer wants to hold the weight of resentment. It is not weakness, it is spaciousness. Saki stood. She did not rush home. She did not write a letter. She simply walked, lighter than she had been in years. The photograph remained in her sleeve, warm from her body, not as proof, not as guilt, just a reminder of something once whole, a cloud that had passed. There is a passage in the Dhammapada. As rain does not stay in the sky, so hatred should not remain in the heart. Tonight, if you are holding someone in the tight fist of your memory, if a name still curls your shoulders inward, if a moment still speaks louder than your breath, do not force yourself to forgive. Just watch. Let it rise. Let it speak. And let it pass. Like a cloud. You are not the sky that clings. You are the sky that releases. Sleep now. Silent sky. The next story gently blossoms under the full moon, where a girl learns that what she desires may not be what she needs, and the lotus teaches without blooming in her hands. We will meet there, at the edge of the pond. Story 23. The girl who wanted the lotus. She saw it every morning, there in the center of the pond, resting on still water like a secret never meant to be spoken aloud. The lotus. Pale pink, petal by petal, cupped toward the rising sun as if in prayer. Untouched, unreachable. The pond belonged to the monastery, but the girl came each day at dawn, long before the monks awoke. Her name was Nari, and she was not a student of scriptures or breath. She was only 16, with calloused hands and dreams too heavy to carry. She brought tea to the kitchen in the mornings, swept leaves in the evenings, and spent the in-between hours gazing at the flower. She wanted it, not just to touch, to possess, to hold it in her hands, to feel its softness, to claim something so pure it might cancel out the ache she carried, the loss of her mother, the silence of her father, the gnawing sense that she was not enough. So one day she stepped into the pond. The mud was cold, thick. The water reached her knees, then her chest. She reached out, but just before her fingers touched the flower, she slipped. The surface rippled violently, the lotus drifted, and she fell, soaked, gasping, covered in silt and shame. A monk had seen. He said nothing, only offered his hand and a dry robe. Later they sat beneath the Bodhi tree, and the girl, her cheeks burning, asked, "Why is it so far?" The monk smiled, "Because some things are not meant to be held, only witnessed." She looked down. "I thought if I could touch it, I'd feel better." He poured tea into her cup. "And did the desire ease when you reached closer?" She shook her head. He placed his palm flat on the ground. "The lotus grows from mud, but it doesn't cling to it. It opens by letting go. In Zen, the lotus is more than a flower. It is a symbol of awakening, of beauty born from rot, of wisdom rising from suffering. But the path of the lotus is not in taking. It is in patience, in ripening, in trust. Desire, in its rawest form, is a hunger to close the gap between what we feel and what we think will complete us. But often, the object is not the answer. The longing itself is the teacher. Psychologically, desire can be a mirror. What we crave, intimacy, safety, recognition, often reflects what has gone unloved within us. But chasing the outer image never fills the inner absence until we turn inward, until we ask, "What is it I truly seek?" Nari began coming to the pond still, but no longer to reach. She sat on the shore with her hands in her lap. Sometimes she watched the flower, sometimes the dragonflies, sometimes the reflection of her own face, no longer needing to be fixed. One morning, she looked into the pond and saw the lotus had bloomed wider, its petals open as if in surrender, and, in her chest, something echoed it. Not grasping, not aching, but simply being. There is a teaching in the Lankavatara Sutra. Things are not what they seem, nor are they otherwise. Meaning, the flower is not just a flower. It is your longing, your letting go, your becoming. Tonight, if there is something you desire, deeply, achingly, do not judge it. Sit beside it, name it gently, and ask, "What does this longing want me to see in myself?" Then wait. Let the lotus remain where it is. Let your breath be the water. Let your heart open, petal by patient petal. Sleep now, blooming one. The next story follows the breath beyond this breath, where the stillness of death meets the urgency of living, and the present becomes the only place where life ever truly waits. We will meet again, beyond this breath. Story 24. Beyond this breath. It was the kind of morning that held its breath. Thin fog curled around the temple stones, and the air shimmered as if time itself had paused to listen. The monks moved softly, bells unheard, words unspoken. In the hall of incense, a single candle burned for an old man who had left his body the night before. He was the oldest among them, not in years, but in silence. His name had once been Hiroshi, but for the last 2 decades they simply called him Joe, the quiet one. He had arrived without possessions, stayed without demands, and disappeared without disturbance. He never taught formally, never sought title, but he was always the one sitting, at dawn, at dusk, through rain and harvest, his back straight, his breath soft, his face lit with something that resembled neither joy nor sadness, but something older than both. And now he was gone. No last words, no ceremony, only an empty cushion, still warm. One monk, the youngest, asked the abbot, "What do we do now?" The abbot touched the boy's chest. "Breathe. But shouldn't we say something? Honor him?" The old monk looked up at the sky, pale with mourning. He left it all behind in the breath before this one. The boy didn't understand. Not yet. Later that day, he walked to the back garden, the one where Joe used to prune the plum tree. The petals had just begun to fall, pink and silent. He sat in the grass and closed his eyes. He took a breath, then another, then he waited, and for a moment, in that in-between, after the exhale, before the inhale, he felt it, the quiet, the vastness, the place where Joe had lived all along. In Zen, death is not an enemy. It is not an error to be corrected. It is a teacher, the ultimate one. It reminds us that every breath is unpromised, every moment a doorway. But we forget, we race, we plan, we bury ourselves in later, as if life is a task we'll finish once. We've figured out enough. But the truth is simpler, sharper. This breath is your life, not the next one, not the one you missed. This one, and then the next, and then the next, until one day there isn't another. But by then, if you've lived well, it will not feel like loss. It will feel like a bow, a final release into what you never owned. Psychologically, we spend much of our lives avoiding the awareness of death. We build around it. We numb its presence. But the more we try to forget impermanence, the more tightly we cling to things, to stories, to people, to pain. But when we turn and face it, softly, steadily, something else arises. Gratitude, presence, urgency, not to rush, but to arrive. Joe once said to the cook, when asked why he prayed before meals, "Because rice doesn't have to come, and yet it does." That was how he lived, and that was how he died, with hands open, with breath released, with nothing he held back. There is a passage from the Buddha in the Maranasati Sutta. Of all the footprints, that of the elephant is supreme. Of all reflections, that on death is the most powerful. Tonight, if you fear the end, if the thought of leaving or being left wraps your chest too tightly, do not run. Sit. Breathe. Not with sadness, with reverence. Place a hand on your chest. Feel the movement, the rise, the fall. That is the bell of your life, ringing now, only now. Everything else is memory or imagination. But this is where you live. This is where you choose. This is where you return. Beyond this breath is not the future. It is this breath, known completely. Let yourself rest there. Sleep now, traveler between heartbeats. The next and final story is waiting where all stories vanish, where the path dissolves, the questions fall silent, and the boat touches no shore. We'll meet again, where the road vanishes. Story 25. Where the road vanishes. The path had no end, and finally, he stopped looking for one. It was near twilight when Rio reached the ridge. The forest behind him was quiet, as if bowing in farewell, and the stone path beneath his feet gradually gave way to moss and wind. Ahead, there was nothing, no shrine, no gate, no sign to say, "You have arrived," just sky and breath and space wide enough to forget his name. He stood there for a long while, not in confusion, but in stillness. He had walked for many years, through teachings and towns, through grief and forgetting, through the long desert of seeking. There had been moments of clarity, others of loss, but something within him had always moved forward, believing in a final something. And now, there was nothing to arrive at. He sat, cross-legged on the cool stone, hands resting like wings folded gently, eyes open, but not chasing. There was a bird somewhere, far below, singing. There was the sound of trees exhaling. There was the feeling of being, just being, not with insight, not with effort. Just there. In Zen, the final gate is no gate at all. It is the undoing of all gates, the ending of all roads, the return to the place you never left, but stopped seeing. We spend our lives walking toward titles, toward healing, toward love, toward God. But every step away is also a step away from the here, and at the edge of that walking, we face the last truth. There is nowhere to go. Because the moment you stop walking, you realize the road was never leading you somewhere. It was leading you to stop. Psychologically, this is the end of the narrative. Self, the story that says, "I am this, I must get there. When I become that, I will be whole." But the story has an edge, and beyond that edge is not failure, it is freedom. Rio watched the light shift across the stones. He thought of the masters who had once spoken in riddles, answered questions with silence, pointed at the moon instead of explaining it. He finally understood why. Because words can only lead so far, then they must fall away, and when they do, only truth remains. Not as concept, as being. He lay back. Let the sky enter his lungs. Let the weight fall from his bones. Let the last thought slip from his mind like a leaf into a stream. And there, without name, without plan, without even breath, to mark the moment, he vanished, not in death, in stillness, in presence so complete that the self could not survive. Only being, only now, only sky. There is a final teaching in the Zen tradition that is not written. It is the master holding up a flower. It is the student smiling. It is the moment before speech and the one after. It is this and only this. Tonight, let go of the road, not because you've failed to arrive, but because there is nothing left to seek. You are here. You are now. You are enough. Let the wind pass through. Let the silence fill you. Let the last light fall softly. And if you must name this place, call it home. Sleep now, resting soul. The journey is not over. It has become you. And as you drift beyond this final word, know this. The empty boat still floats, and the sky welcomes you. Without condition. Always. Closing invitation for the listener. YouTube audio closing segment. If you've listened this far, thank you, truly, for walking this path with me. These 25 Zen stories were not just teachings, they were invitations to sit, to feel, to return. If even one breath became softer for you, one thought passed with less grip, one tear fell and felt understood, then these stories have done their work. If this touched something inside you, I invite you to leave a comment. Share what moved, what changed, what stayed. And if your heart calls for more, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow for future journeys like this one. You are never alone on this road. Even where the road vanishes, we'll meet again, in silence, in story, in stillness. Until then, bow deeply and rest. Closing message to the listener: if you've made it to the end of this quiet journey, thank you deeply. The empty boat was never meant to carry answers, only space. Space to feel, space to remember, space to breathe. If something here opened your heart, softened your breath, or helped you return to yourself, even for a moment, I invite you to let it be known. Leave a comment. Share what resonated, what stayed with you. Your reflections are part of the practice. If you found peace in these stories, please consider liking, sharing with someone who might need it, and subscribing to this channel. Every gesture helps keep this boat afloat, slow, silent, and open. For those who need to rest a while, we don't rush here, we don't chase, we just return again and again to the place that was never far. This is the empty boat, and you are always welcome aboard. Until the next story. Stay gentle. Stay true.